Hi, Sherry, Matt Philleo here in the studio. I just want to give you that critique on your portrait. So the format is I'm going to set up a side-by-side comparison of the reference photo and then your actual painting in progress. So we're going to do a comparison, kind of contrast and see where we can guide you along and get you to a higher level of realism in that portrait. So let me switch over to the other camera. Or I should say switch over to my screen. But here we have the actual photo and then your painting. And it is much improved from your first rendition of it. So I want you to be encouraged with that. You're doing a really good job getting the features of her eyes. I can see this is way more accurate now. Let me give you some tips and some guidance on improving the realism. The first thing I'm going to do is discuss the shape of the head. Now in the original photo, it looks like you were missing all of her head. It was cropped in, and so that makes it kind of difficult to see exactly where her head should stop and start. But just based on some portraits I've done in the past and observing people's head shapes and how they look, I can tell right off the bat that you're missing something over on this side of the hairline. So you're going to want to extend her head further on this side a little bit. As it is right now, her head shape seems a little bit oblong, just a little bit askew. So you want to kind of get a shape like this if you follow the cursor, and that'll give you a little more roundness on the top, and it should be more accurate. Especially since, judging by the shape of her ear and kind of the distance between this eye and this side of the face, her head is turned actually just ever so slightly to her right or to our left. And so actually the head should be sticking out a little further, maybe even than what I suggested, maybe even this far out. But it looks like you might have changed that aspect a little bit, so you don't want to overdo it. But definitely add, about this much to the head, just with the color of the hair, and that should help. Okay. Now, going into the eyes. Eyes are quite tricky, to paint. But there's some rules of thumb that you can use to get things to a higher level of realism. And everybody's eyes are different, so you can't use a one-size-fits-all approach. You do have to pay attention to the way each person's eyes look. And you're kind of getting the overall gist of her eyes. But just for some clarification and some help, the eyelids are a little too dark. So you'd want to soften them up. You could use some of the flesh tone you mixed and go over with a glaze. You thin it with the clear medium. And you would go over this color. Now the thing to keep in mind is that as you do that, the color of the eyelid will get cooler in tone because you're mixing something with white on top of something that's very dark. And the contrast of those tends to make the color cooler than it should be. It'll look more blue than it should be. So you'd have to go back over it again and warm it up with something kind of like the lip color, something warmer. But you would want to soften those eyelids because they shouldn't be as dark as the bottom part. Notice in the photo how dark this is, but then this is a little bit lighter. And so you want to see that difference between this value here and that value there. And you want to soften this quite a bit. Same thing on the other side. Now, one thing I notice here that you want to change is look at the shape of her eye. And when people paint eyes, from our drawing during childhood, we're used to turning realism into symbols. So we convert the actual shape of an eye into something like a football or an oval, when in fact it doesn't have that shape. It's hard to describe, but it's not a clean oval. It has kind of a apex here, and then it gets a little wider generally in this portion. Of course, that varies by the person and their ethnicity and that kind of thing, but in her instance, notice that the angle of the top part of this eyelid where I'm touching with the cursor goes like this. See that angle? It's quite straight, and then it kind of goes down like that. Now it is rounded a little bit, but if we just wanted to simplify it, it's this angle here and that angle there. See that? And so you have it just very round and even. And so you're going to want to capture that shape. Also you want to thicken the eyelid. And when I mean that, I mean this upper part. You have the lower eyelid that goes over the actual eye, and then you have this fold where the eyelid meets into the eye socket and the fleshy area above that. And so that fold above the eyelid needs to be higher up. It needs to be thicker. So one way to do that would be to add some of this flesh tone and paint over this area, because you need to get this angle correct, and this needs to be straighter. You see what I'm saying, how this goes down? So thicken this area so that the flesh tone cuts in right over like that. And then you're going to erase this line, and when I say erase, I mean paint over it with this flesh tone, mask it out, and then repaint a new line a little bit lighter, because you went too dark with that, a little bit lighter, and then get this angle in like that. You see that? And that'll help you to get her individual shape. Now I like the reflection. You did nice with that. That's a good nuance. You do want to pay attention to the shape of the pupil, the black part of the eye. Notice how it's very round, it's very small. You kind of made it a little too big. So you can take some of this eye color and cut in a little bit and redefine that shape and get that pupil smaller. Another thing too with eyes is that eyes are not white. You know, the white of the eye is very rarely actually white. Now, I'll go into depth on my shading class and cover this, you know, in great depth, but notice that, just for sake of discussion, look at this white window I have behind. You see this? This is white here. This window I have behind. But look how dark this is in comparison. Look how dark it is in comparison to the reflection, which is quite bright. So look at that, then look at the reflection. Compare the two. And you'll see that the white of the eye is actually quite dark because of the shadows cast from the eyebrow ridge and the socket. So it's rarely ever white. And most people make that mistake when they start out. They paint the white of the eye as white, when in fact it's not. It's more of a dark gray. Don't make it too dark, but just look at the value. It's actually very similar to the flesh tone. Same value, same level of light and dark. It's just a little different color. It's cooler in color. So you're going to want to use a blue mixed with maybe a little rhomb or dark brown and some white, but kind of on the bluish side, and you can go over and glaze over the white of the eye and mute it down. Also pay attention to the tear duct. That's a very light area, and you're going to want to use a mixture of this color and the flesh tone to capture that. Have a few reflections. The way to capture that would be just to paint this shape, kind of a pinkish triangle, and you just paint that right in there, and then you go on top of it with a flesh tone, and you do a dab here and a dab there, and then that will give you your tear duct area. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind as well. As far as the eyebrow shapes, you're doing a better job on that, but still her eyebrows are very, very light. So most of the suggestion of the eyebrows comes with the shadow from her eye socket. So it's just a darker color. You see this value here, and then this value here is quite a bit darker. And so if you can get that shadow in there, then all you need to do is add just a few dabs to suggest the eyebrows, and that's it. Get that shadow in there. That's kind of a triangular shape. Follow the cursor, and you'll see a triangle, all right? And it's just a darker version of this flesh tone, kind of like what you did here, but even darker than that. If you can get that shape in there, you glaze it, so you don't add white to it or very little white, and you use a clear medium and you put it over very thin at first, maybe 2 or 3 layers. You don't have to do it all in one shot, but just a few layers will really get that in there. Okay, so remember I was talking about the highlights, and there's some interesting highlights on this side of the nose and the cheek, and they're actually cooler in tone. I'm imagining there's a window shining on her, and the outdoor light is cooler in temperature than the indoor light, and that's why you see this is kind of a bluer color than this, which is warmer. It would be nice if you could get that in there, but I would rather see you get the value correct than the color temperature. The value is more important. So if you can get the highlight in here, notice this shape. It's kind of a not really a triangle, but it's like a triangle and then a square below it. You see that shape? It's like this. And if you can take some white, mix it with, oh, maybe a little bit of raw umber dark, and you glaze over it. Now it has to have mostly white. You don't want it to be dark, so just a touch of raw umber dark. And the white will have enough of a cool tone that it should add the right color temperature to this. But again, you know, be careful. Just make sure that it's mostly the white. The raw umber dark would just kind of counteract the white a little bit and give it a bit of warmth. But you can go over and glaze that highlight on there. Make sure that it ends up being lighter than your flesh tone. And then you can also get that on the cheek as well. Now notice the shape though too of her hair, and you need to move the hairline over so you can have that three-dimensionality of her cheek coming out in space, coming forward in space, you know, so it looks round. So move that hairline over and get that shape in. It's kind of an oval shape, this highlight. This is very bright. This is somewhat bright, but not as bright as that up there. I'm talking about her chin. Her chin is just a little darker in value than the cheek. All right, and so another thing I see, Sherry, is that you want to get the mouth shape and angle more accurate. If you draw a line going across from the eyes like so, and then you draw a line in the middle of the mouth, they're pretty parallel. But what I see is that the mouth is too straight. You need to move the angle down, and so it actually needs to go down lower. You're going to have to paint over this actually with some flesh tone and get this angle correct. You can use a ruler or a straight edge on your reference photo to see it, and then that'll help you to capture the angle as you paint. Also, the mouth needs to go over further to the left. Notice if you draw a straight line like this, and when I mean a straight line, make it parallel with the angle of her face. Imagine this is a square, okay? Some kind of a square. And so when I mean draw a straight line, it should be perpendicular, you know, right angles to this angle of her eyes going across and then down. And then this line, if you run it that way, should go right to the middle of her eye. Same thing with this side, should go right to the middle of the eye. Whereas I see this line here goes to the right of her eye. It needs to go further out. Okay, so if you change that, that's really going to help a lot too. Some of the same colors that you use for this portion here, you can also add to her hair as highlights, and that will really help you as well. Lastly, I'd like to see some dark shadows on this side of the face. But I think I probably gave you enough for now to work on. And so if you can do some of these things I mentioned, it's going to go a long ways in really helping this portrait along and helping it to look so much more like her. So, but excellent work. I love your diligence. I mean, you just really keep your nose to the grind, and I love that. That's why I want to help you as much as I can. And I'll help you more than this too. But for now, incorporate this if you can, and send your in-progress images, put them on Facebook or on the Realistic Acrylic site, wherever is convenient for you. And we'll keep helping you here as a group. And everybody else has given you some fantastic comments as well. So if you guys are watching this, please comment on this as well. We really appreciate everything. So have a blessed day, and I'll talk to you soon.